Hey everybody, I said I would make a video on how I do these 5x7 pouches, and I decided tonight was the night this was going to happen. So I'm making a whole bunch of these little pouches in 5x7s. I sew them at 1/4 of an inch. You're welcome to change your seam allowance if you do that and you want to work with a 5x7. Yours are clearly going to be smaller than mine when you finish. This is how I do it, where I add a little tab on the end. I will take my zipper and I cut it, and I have a whole bunch of these. I got them pretty cheap, so they were like 11 inches, and I just cut them down. I don't care. I cut it so that the end, this is all the way to the end on the left, and then my end here is at 3/4. So I cut it so that that's how it's going to be at 3/4. If you measure it, I don't know, it comes to about, it's like 5 1/4 inches long. Not the zipper to zipper, but the entire length of the tape is 5 1/4 inches long. Basically how you want to do it when you're making these pouches is that your zipper length, meaning from here to the zipper end, like as if you were doing it with one of these, from here to here should be 1.5 inches shorter than the width of your pouch. That gives you enough room to put a tab on one end or a tab on both ends, or to pull this down into the seam. That's how I base it. So to get this nice on here, I cut my piece. It's a 1-inch square because the width of the tape is typically 1 inch. And I'll take a piece of double-sided tape because I don't like it to move. And I slap it kind of in the middle. Just depends on which way I want to go with it. Tear that off. And then I position it so it's just about even. I'm always okay if I have a little bit more on the back side than the front side. That way I know for a fact I catch it when I sew on this edge. So you can see right here that it's a little bit wider at the bottom than it is on the top. So now I'm going to stitch that. And if I do it quick, I don't have to switch my foot. Otherwise, I will switch my foot and I will put on a Teflon foot. This is a Teflon plate, and the machine I'm sewing with is a Juki DDL 8700. I like the stitch length to be long, and I typically start it and get it in there, and I put it at a 4 and just stitch across. Done. And you can see you get a pretty decent looking stitch. It's on both sides and we're good to go. Now I'm a freak about tape. I love tape. I love it. I love everything about it. I hate using pins. I don't like using, you know, I have them. I just find that they're a pain to use, these clips. I only use them when I sew big items, but little ones like this, I love double-sided tape. Before I do that, I'm going to show you what I do. So on this is going to be my front of my little pouch. And so on the left-hand side, I mark it, and I like to use felt tip markers, and I don't need to make a giant line. I don't have to worry about wiping it off. I make it at 3/4 of an inch on this side. And then on this side, I also make it 3/4 of an inch. Because again, I sew at 1/4 of an inch, and that's gonna allow, once I turn it, the space of the fabric, even though this is the stitch side, it always puffs to about there, and we're gonna have a nice little gap right there when we're done. You're gonna love it. We're currently listening to the London Philharmonic Orchestra, for those of you who are interested. Sometimes I get tired of hearing other music that just keeps rattling in my head. Anyway, all right, so now I rip this off. And normally I will have all these prepped. And I don't ever put the tape past this, and you'll see why in a minute. So I lay this down, sorry, wrong side down. So it's basically right side. This is considered the right side. This is the right side of the fabric. Right sides facing each other. If you want, and you're retentive like me, because I am, I'm gonna go do a real quick trim right there. I have a little cutting board, a cutting mat set up next to my table. Every machine in my space has a cutting mat on it. The machine is typically on the cutting mat. I don't like to have to get up 100 different times, although I do because I'm a weirdo. I don't like to though. So now I know my mark's right there. And you can either put the tape on here or put the tape on this. It doesn't matter. It really doesn't make a difference. Only deal is if you do it on here, then you don't have to mark this with your 3/4 on the sides there. And so I'm gonna stick the tape on. Now you can get the tape. I buy mine at Tandy leather. It is 3/16 of an inch wide. I love it. It's non-repositionable, which means that basically once I stick it on and it's not coming off. All right, so I'm gonna line up my corners and I am gonna sew this. Now this is my really narrow foot. I love that foot, absolutely love it. I believe that's the flight of the bumblebee, and she's on fire. She sounds crazy. If it's not, it just sounds like a bumblebee in my head. All right, so I'm gonna sew this at 1/4 of an inch. This is a really narrow foot, I don't have to worry about it. Every zipper I install gets sewn at 1/4 of an inch. So whenever I make my patterns, I always know that I'm gonna lose 1/4 of an inch at the top. All right. So we're just gonna stitch this. All right, now I'm gonna open it up because I've gotten to the zipper. And now I know that my little spot, I can see it through here. It's right here. This is what I do when I get here. I'm gonna stitch just to that spot. I'm gonna go right to there. And I now pull it down. If you can't get your little fingers in there, I picked up a pair of hemostats from Amazon. I use these. And I pull it down, line this back up, let it lay flat. Now don't worry if your sides don't match, it's really not a big deal. And that's it. And we will see. All right, there it is. Pretty. Now what I'm gonna do, I do not top stitch the seam or the lining fabric when I top stitch, and I do it right after. My stitch length is already nice. I can make it a little longer if I want. It's not a big deal. And again, I use the edge of the foot and line it up here on the edge of the fabric where the two meet, and I'm just going to stitch across. This is a great time to make pouches for people for Christmas and practice your straight stitching because you can use the edge as a guide. I don't know what happened with my thread there, so we're going to trim it. Now I'm not always so good at getting it in the eye of the needle, so this is a hit or miss right here. I'm sure it has to do with my age. I'm getting old. So what I do, I have one of these fun handy dandy things that I used to find in my mom's button boxes, and I always wonder what they were. And she's like, oh, I don't need that. I don't need that. I'm so good at this. And she was. I, on the other hand, was never very good at it. I always needed it. Okay, so now we've done that. I'm just gonna finger press this down. These are lightly interfaced. I prefer my pouches to be interfaced a bit. Most of my stuff, I don't interface my bags with the fleece interfacing. I don't like it. It's just my personal preference. All right, so now we're gonna move on and do the back side. Now, when you do the back side, it's 3/4 of an inch on both sides again. So I'm gonna take my little pen and I'm gonna mark it, but I'm also gonna, this one I mark just for lining up when I go and do it, but I also mark the lining piece because when I flip it over, that's the one I'm gonna see. My lining piece is gonna be on the top when I stitch it. So I'm gonna put this on here. And I know that I can put the tape all the way to the left end because the left is actually not the left, it's gonna be the right when you flip it over. I know, it's tricky. So now I'm gonna do this. Peel this off. I got new nails today. I got my nails prettied. And they're a little thicker because I did no chip, so it's hard for me to grab the tape. Anywho, so now by doing this, I can get an idea of where because I know that the end of this is at 3/4. So I'm kind of lined up. And like, I know it said it's not repositionable. On the zipper tape, you can move it around. But when you put this stuff on like fleece, good luck. You're never getting it off again. All right, so now on this one, this side is the side that's 3/4. I am going to mark it. I'm actually gonna mark the back side because that's what I'm gonna see. And here's the other side. We're gonna mark it at 3/4. I'll slap some tape on this. I know I use a lot of tape. Some people don't like to. It's not cost effective. I charge enough for my bags that I work it in, so I know exactly how much to charge and not worry about using the tape. I wouldn't say I necessarily put it into the cost of the bag, but I know what it cost me. And so when I work out the cost of my bags and whatnot, this is just an expense. It's like needles to me. You have to buy needles for your machine. I have to buy tape because I love it. I can't help it. So now I'm gonna sew this side at 1/4 inch. Same deal as before. You can backstitch here, you don't have to, it's fine. If you were using a domestic machine, you're gonna wanna have your zipper foot on for this. I open it up. You can see I did the opening the zipper. Now I'm gonna get it to this black spot, which is my 3/4 inch mark. And I am right there. And now I'm gonna grab these. Again, don't have to, you can do whatever you want. I prefer to have my little hemostats right on hand because I love my hemostats. They were originally my husband's, I stole them. And then he discovered they were missing. And he discovered that they were down here in my sewing studio. He came and took them. He needs them in the garage. I don't particularly care for that, but that's fine. I went and bought my own. So now I'm gonna flip it back, everything's zipped up shut. I'm already at my number 4, and I am going to sew away using this edge along this edge. Oh, and see, that happens to me more often than not. With the DDL, it does not cut the thread, so you cut the thread, and you always have to make sure that you have the needle and the thread in the proper position where the thread is not going to get sucked back up, which I have that happen, but it's okay. Not a big deal. Now again, you can see my lining fabric is not on this side, it's on the left side, so I'm not catching it as I sew. And trim it, and trim it, and there's that. And that would be my child who's coming down here to ask what we're doing. And he's currently going to leave. And now he's giving me a look. He can't see you and you can't see him, but he's like, "What are you doing, woman?" He makes videos upstairs of football things. I think he's leaving. Maybe he's not. He could be playing with the dog. All right, so now what we're gonna do, we're just gonna sew it all the way around. And here we go. Everything is at 1/4 inch. Okay. Now when you get to this top, you're gonna wanna check it and make sure that this lines up with this. That is one of the bigger keys to making a nice little pouch. This is the only time I use pins. I don't want it. I don't like it when it doesn't line up. And it's never perfect, but I try my best to get it that way because it's one of those things that really bothers me. Okay. On the lining, I interfaced it with, let me think what I lined it with. P44. It's a lightweight interfacing. You can see I didn't get it all the way to the bottom. That's okay. I starched the heck out of my stuff. I don't worry about it. Now, I'm gonna turn it inside out in this space. So what I do is I stitch to here. Usually it's about 1.5 inches. And then I back stitch it. So when and I'll show you what I'm gonna do. I open it with my seam ripper. So now I'm going to do the same thing here, back stitch a little bit, get to the corner. Now I don't know if any of you have ever noticed this, but all feet have it curves up. There's a curve right here. And On my Viking and on this machine, where this curve is at is 1/4 inch. And perfectly lined up. Now, before I stitch this side, I'm going to stick my hand in and open this because I have a tendency to forget to do that. Okay, so now I did that, and I'm going to line up my top pieces, my main fabrics, at that top seam. And on the occasion, I will back stitch right there. There we go. Now, it's okay if you're lining in your main fabric. If your main fabric's a little bit bigger or smaller, it's totally fine because you can size things up using your rotary cutter and cut it, or you can just make sure you sew it at as long as your lining fabric is smaller than your main fabric, they fit together nicely. So don't fret over it too much. There's no point. Don't lose sleep over it. All right. Now, the trick to getting these corners to lay flat, and there is a trick to it, is to trim it on an angle. Some don't, I do. I like to trim it. I'm looking for my other scissors, but these are gonna have to do. So I trim it that way, and then I trim it that way. And I will trim it flat here. So for me, I do 3 trims. And I'm not gonna lie, sometimes I've cut the seam, whatever. Let's go back and fix it. Everything I do, if I make a mistake, I just do it again and I just learn from the next one. Or I don't learn and I do it again and again and again. So now here, this is where I'm gonna flip it through the hole. So I just go in and cut it. That way I don't have to worry about trying to find it or making sure that then I have to lift up the foot and make a nice gap when I stitch, whatever. I just seam it open. Just use your seam rippers. We're already really good friends with our seam rippers anyway. So what does it matter, right? All right. So you don't have to worry about tripping the corners on this because it's just gonna flip back into the bag anyhow. But I do like to get in here through the open seam and I'll pop my corners, and sometimes I will, if I have my handy dandy chopstick down here, I'll use that, but I don't know where I put it. It's probably by my iron because it's not over here. And so now I'm just gonna gently get those corners out. That's it. So now I'll tuck this back in just to make sure I'm nice and smooth, and I am. Okay, so I'll pull this out. That way I got all 4 corners out, and I am going to stitch this up. Here we go. Now because I created that seam when I stitched it, there's kind of a crease in there, and that is why I sew it and then I open it with my seam ripper. Because I stitched that pieces of fabric, it made a nice little crease. And then I just make sure I know where it's at, and it's right there. So I'm gonna start a few spots back, reduce my stitch length to 3, get it started, and I'm gonna sew a little bit and then back stitch. Because the one thing that irritates me the most is when I'm got a nice bag that I bought and the bottom comes apart. It drives me absolutely bonkers because then I have to fix it. I sew enough. I don't want to have to fix a bag that I buy. And yes, I buy bags. I buy them all the time. But only when they're on clearance, because I like my stuff on clearance. All right, there we go. Trim it, trim it, trim, trim. Tuck it in. And at this point, because I've manipulated it so much, I would give it a shot, a nice shot on my machine, on my iron over there. And that's it. And you can see by doing it and marking it at 3/4 inch and sewing it at 1/4 inch, we've given ourselves a little space. I don't know what you would lose through that hole. No money's gonna fall through that. I'm not gonna lose my lipstick. I don't know. So I don't, I mean, if you want it to be smaller, well, then mark it at not 3/4 inch. You can mark it at, I don't know, say 5/8, and then you'd have a smaller gap, but you would still have a nice curve right there. So that's it. That's how you do it. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask. Thanks.